Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have Bambi Lynn with me. Hey, Bambi.
Well, hi. I'm so excited to be on your podcast today.
Yes, I'm so excited to hear your story. So let me read your bio. Bambi Lynn is a mother of 6 adult children and 13 grandchildren and counting, with one that passed away a few hours after he was born. She has children serving or served in the armed forces, and she spent 28 years homeschooling her children. Bambi lived in Buffalo, New York for most of her life until she relocated to Brunswick, Georgia. She works for a data science company in which she traveled for 7 years for them until they dissolved her position in the last month of 2022. Bambi became an author in June of 2023, The Journey of Josephine. Bambi's story on how God took a broken little girl with all her trauma and brokenness and healed her on the inside out. Bambi loves to go to the beach for her quiet time and ask her questions with God. All right. Well, first of all, I resonate with the homeschooling. As a behavioral optometrist, I work with lots of homeschooling parents. And they would come in and would be checking one kid's eyes and the other 7 were lined up against the wall, on the floor. Mom was sitting on the chair because
I totally remember
kids had
those
to go
days.
everywhere, no matter what was happening. And that's
Uh,
how it
they,
was.
my children came to all of my appointments for the gynecologist when I was pregnant, and they all lined up, and they knew a whole lot more than I wanted them to know.
Oh my goodness. Well, tell us your story.
Wow, my story. Well, my story, I came from a very dysfunctional alcoholic home. Grew up, my parents split up back and forth until I was about 10. My dad was not a nice alcoholic. He wasn't a laughing alcoholic. He was a very mean, alcoholic. So we grew up in that kind of environment. I did have a grandfather that decided, to take my innocence away when I was between 4 and 5 years old. We moved a lot when we were kids, but every time we came back from my dad, we would move right across the street from my grandmother. My grandmother was my saving grace, even though my grandfather had, took advantage of me. I still loved my grandmother. She still was peace to me. And I didn't tell anybody until my grandmother had passed away that my grandfather had done what he had done. And then there were other granddaughters and, that he had done the same thing. I left home the day after my 16th birthday thinking, I was going to conquer the world. I moved in with my uncle by marriage. And at the time, I didn't know, they have words for things today that they didn't have words, when I was a kid. And what they call it today, he started grooming me, and I was in pageants um, and modeled and things like that. And then one night and every night for like 4 months, I realized why he was grooming me. And then after like 4 months, I finally went to the school nurse, and I told the school nurse what was happening in his home. They put me into foster care, and then at that time, because things have changed so dramatically from when I was a kid, you're talking, 45 years ago, 40 years ago, um, we went to court. He became his own attorney, and he got 18 months away from me for 100 yards away from me for 18 months. So that was his quote unquote punishment. But then a few years later, he ended up in prison for 10 years because he had done the same thing to other people. So I continue on the path, of my life. I did run away from my foster care because I never understood love, because I didn't experience, unconditional love. So when I did something wrong there, I thought, oh my goodness, they're not going to like me. They're going to kick me out. So I ran away, and I moved in with a gentleman that was almost 9 years older than me. We ended up having a kind of relationship. Um, But during that time, I wanted to end my life because I just couldn't do this anymore. And I went to the bridge in our hometown and I went to take my life because I figured nobody was even going to notice that I was missing. And when I went to jump, a police officer saw me and stopped and pulled me off of the bridge and put me inside of the car, inside of the police car, and then took me to a psychiatric center for kids. And they took some blood work and did some testing and things like that, and took me into a room and said, "Did you know that you were pregnant?" And I went, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea that I was 16 years old and pregnant. And I asked them if they can let me go into my own room. And I went into my room, and that was when I said, "God, if there's truly a God and you are real, you need to save me and my baby. And I will honor you and all the days of my life, and I will serve you until the day that I die." And I was there for 28 days, everything. A pastor ended up taking me into his home. I lived at their home, and then I was married. I got married a couple years later, had some kids. I am a mother of 6, just like you have said. My first husband, he decided other women were his priority and not his family. So after 3 affairs, he left, and I was devastated. I was a young mom with all these kids, and I stayed, committed and everything for, and wouldn't give him a divorce for almost 2 years. And then finally that ended. The divorce did go through. And then I remarried again. And that man decided that putting his hands on me was something that he could do. And for 8 years, I lived in a domestic violence household, just believing that something was going to change. And I stayed. People always ask women that are victims of domestic violence. I stayed because I wanted to protect my children. I knew he could have my kids every other weekend and 1 day a week if the court said he could. And I was willing to try to do anything I could, to be able to save my children and wait till they were the age to be able to tell somebody what was going on, and that the court system would be in my favor. So that is kind of like the gist of, the turmoil and the heartache that I went through in the beginning of my life. And, I do, my oldest daughter that I had a teenage pregnancy, she is now 37 years old. I do have 13 grandchildren. And just like you said in my bio, I do have a grandson that passed away hours after he was born, Isaac. That kind of changed all of our lives. My son and his former wife, they didn't make it. They were young, teenage, they were a young couple that, couldn't survive, the heartache of losing a child. So there was just so many other things that had happened within the midst of those 8 years. One of the things is that I was thinking about today, that I was coming on and thinking about the defining moments in my life. What moments, defined me, or what moments that I can remember that I realized something, in my book, The Journey of Josephine, that I wrote. That's my first book that I wrote. It is the story of my life and the raw version of my life. And I tell a story in there that my ex-husband and we were at his parents' house, and we were leaving, and I was loading up my children into the car. I had identical twin boys. I was loading them up in the car. I turned the car on because it was cold, and I went back into the house to get my other son, put him in the car. Then I went back into the house, and when I went back into the house, I just said, "Hey, are you coming?" And when I went back out, there was a police officer next to my car. And the police officer said, "Is that your car?" And I said, "Yeah, I was just leaving my kids." He goes, "Why did you leave the car on?" And I said, "Well, because it's cold, and I was just running in, and putting them in, and then I was going to drive off." He handcuffed me immediately and put me in the back of his car. And my ex-husband came out of his parents' house, and they were asking whose car was that. And my ex-husband said, "Oh, that's her car. That's her car." He never took he never did anything to protect me. And, and they put me in the back of the police car. They took me down to the police station. They told me that I could have one phone call. I made the phone call to my ex-husband, and he said, you know what, you've been praying for a Paul experience, use this as a Paul experience. And I knew at that moment that he hated me. I knew at that moment that there was a defining moment. Like, you're always looking like, does this person really love me? Does this person really love me? No, he hated me. And he had me stay a whole night inside of the jail. I got out of the jail cell, stood in front of the judge, and the judge apologized for what the police officers did. But that was a defining moment, in my life. A hard moment, but it was one of those defining moments that I knew that we weren't going to be married, forever, because he hated me. So I was thinking about that today, and I don't know why that came up to my memory today, but it was such a moment, in my life. Another defining moment in my life, which was kind of, this was a cool one, is that somebody had asked me, to go and do an embodied women, and like going to rejoice in the fact that we were women. Okay. So I went, and they said to bring your bathing suit. And I'm like, okay, never thinking about it, but realizing that when we got there, she was going to take pictures of us in our bathing suits. And I'm not thin, but I'm not heavy, but I'm not thin either, and I'm a little older, so there's some cellulite and, and the wrinkles and, and everything. And when she said that we had to like take a picture in our bathing suits, it was like a defining moment for me that I had to learn that even at 47 years old, to be comfortable in a skin that I've never been comfortable in. Even when I was thin and modeling and doing pageants, I still was never comfortable in my skin. But at 47 years old was the first time that I allowed somebody to take a picture of me in my bathing suit. So I thought about that defining moment, I thought about when I was 49, one of my girlfriends, she said, Bambi, you have to do something before you're 50. And she said, you have to do something grand before you're 50. She goes, how about get a tattoo? And I said, no, not doing that. Not getting a tattoo. So then she said, why don't you go skydiving? And I said, absolutely not. I'm not going skydiving. So my son and I, one of my sons, I went to go visit him in California. He was stationed in California. I went to visit him, and we went to one of those sky things, inside sky things. So when I went there, the gentleman told us this is just like skydiving. It's identical to skydiving. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can do this. Absolutely, I can do this. So I called my girlfriend. I said, okay, I'll go skydiving before I'm 50. So I made the appointment. I won an award with my company to go to Tampa. And so I said to my daughters, I said, if anybody wants to go with me, they just have to agree to go in on one excursion. And I'll put your name inside of a hat. And then I'll draw it out, whoever wants to go. My one daughter said, Mom's going to make us go skydiving. And my other girl said, no way. Mom would never go skydiving. So I drew a name out, and my daughter, Ashley, said, Mom, what are we doing? And I said, we're actually going skydiving. So I went skydiving, jumped out of a plane at 17,000 feet. And I realized there's a book by Mel Robbins, The 5-Second Rule, that don't give your brain 6 seconds, because your brain will immediately tell you no way and bring fear into you. Make a decision within the first 5 seconds. Well, I went out of that plane. I had gum in my mouth. So I thought, and the gum went away, like it disappeared. And I thought that I had killed somebody, because the whole saying about the Empire State Building, if a penny drops and it hits somebody, you can kill them. Well, I'm thinking I killed somebody with my gum. Then I vomited out. This vomit comes into my face. The guy's telling me to smile, and I'm like, I can't smile. And then we finally land, and he goes, would you do that again? And I'm like, absolutely not. Then my daughter flies after me, and I go into the room where the videos are going on because they can watch a video. My daughter is swearing up a storm, and these people are in the room going, I feel sorry for that mother. Who is that mother? That daughter is really mad. And it was my daughter. She was furious at me. But that was a defining moment for me. I would never do it again. But that was a defining moment. That was something that I'm like, I can be brave enough, to be able to do that. So I think that all of us have defining moments in our lives, and we have a lot of them, that continue to transform us, to becoming who we are, and I guess my other defining moment is when I became an author. The opportunity to be able to write my story, and to tell my story, and to allow my story has allowed other women to tell their stories, because we don't have to live behind our stories anymore. And I think that we live in a society today that allows us to deal with our trauma, that our trauma doesn't have to be secrets, anymore, because when I grew up, it was secrets. You didn't tell anybody about the dirty old uncle. You didn't tell about the stories that happened within your home. And now we live in a society today that they're saying, let's talk. And so when I wrote my story, I felt that I was writing my story to give permission for others to write theirs, to give them the power back, and to be brave enough and courageous enough to be able to know and to stand in their own mirror and realize that they survived, and that they not only survived, but they became heroes in their own lives. So that was why I wrote, The Journey of Josephine. The Treasures of My Heart was written for the sole purpose of that I felt like within the midst of the storms, whenever we're in storms, we forget that good things do happen in the storms, because we're so caught up in the storm. And the storms don't last forever. The storms are going to end. And so then you can look back, in the storm, and realize that there were really cool things that, that happen within the storm. It's kind of like when a fire happens. I just read somewhere just today that when a fire takes place in California, when the fields are all burnt down, there's actually a flower that grows only after the fire, only after the ashes take place. And it was called the fire poppy, that grows, that within the midst of our storms and with the midst of our ashes, there's something that grows from that. And, the Bible talks about the fact that ashes turn into beauty. But you can't have beauty until you have the ashes, until you have the destruction. So I just thought that was really cool, that even during a fire in the wilderness, there are beautiful flowers that transpire, over that. So I just think that right now in the journey of my life, that God is continually to teach me to become, who I'm supposed to be, that my trauma happened. But when I read my book for the first time, when it came out, it's actually been 1 year on June 9th that The Journey of Josephine came out. When I read my story, I spent the whole night reading it and crying and bawling. But then after I read it, I didn't know that girl anymore, because that girl had been transformed. I didn't stay here. I didn't stay being a victim. I didn't stay wallowing. I grew, and I excelled, and I learned, and I thrived. So that's why I think this year I'm telling my story more on podcasts, to tell my story, because my story isn't about being a victim. My story is about being a survivor and thriving, and just because we all have things in our lives that we wish we didn't go through and didn't happen to us, but it's what we do with those. It's not that it happened to us, because life happens, but it's what we do with the things that have happened to us that are able to help the next generation, because our stories are not for us. Our stories are for the generation behind us. Our stories are for the women behind us that are struggling to get up in the morning. They need to see the people that have overcome, to know that they also can become overcomers. So that's kind of like in a nutshell. I don't know if it's as much as you wanted, but that's kind of like a nutshell of what has been happening in my life.
Well, it was awesome. Thank you. And, I just want to talk about like the beginning of your story. So many, especially women, but it happens to men too, have been through sexual abuse as a child. And recently I went to a gala for Sapria, which is an organization that actually has retreats and does education for people to heal from that, because a lot of times there's a lot of shame behind that, or just, knocks your confidence, it knocks your
Mm.
feeling about yourself. And so I know you went through a lot, but my question is, as you were raising your children, how did you educate them? How did you talk to them about them, their self-esteem, about safety, and that keeping them safe from something like that?
I I don't know if it was so much of an education as it was a fear. That I think that with my daughters, I parented fearfully, because as a mom, you can't take back what somebody does to you, but you can prevent that from happening. So, my children weren't allowed to go to people's homes. My children weren't allowed to go into a public bathroom until I've opened up every stall, and stood outside. It was a constant conversation in our household. So I don't know if I did it right, but I did it according to how much that I had healed, and things like that. It was a conversation that we had. It was an open conversation. Sometimes my daughters felt like it was too much of an open conversation, but I was just in survivor mode. Trying. I was a young mom trying to just do it right. And so I probably went to an extreme, that they weren't to be near some family members. If I had an inkling, I didn't like them by themselves with any family members. Grandparents, I was not a mother that liked grandparents spending the children spending the night with their grandparents, and their grandparents sleeping with the child. That was a no-no in my family, and it still, to me, makes me feel uncomfortable that grandparents do that. Because I was sexually, abused by my grandfather, and one time was in the bed when I was in the middle. So I just think that, for me at the time, would I do things different? If I was a parent, if I was a mommy now, maybe I wouldn't be so fearful. But I just wanted to do everything I could to protect them.
Mhm. Which is what every mother does. I
Yeah.
mean, they talk about us in this time and age being helicopter parents. I remember as a 3-year-old saying, you know, barely able to talk, "Mommy, I'm going to my friends," and they were like 4 houses down the sidewalk. And I'd go toddling down to see my friend.
You can't do that today.
No, no. But now, I want to see them. Well, my kids are older now, but if they were in the yard, I'm going to be looking out the window and I'm seeing them every second. If they're at
Yep.
the park, I'm there. I'm not on
Yeah.
the other side of the park. If I'm in the store, they're like right by me.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a different time period.
Mhm.
And I don't think that any of them can be compared, because sometimes, you see all these things even on Facebook and memes and things like that, oh, this is how I grew up. We can't compare. And I just think that sometimes looking at it that way, we're trying to create something that's never going to be anymore. And then feeling guilty that our children don't live in that environment anymore. It's just a new day.
Mhm.
And I can't go back. There were some things that were great about growing up, but then there were some things that weren't so great about the freedom that we had, and our parents not knowing where we're at, and the things that we did that we shouldn't have done, that nobody was looking. So there's good with the bad, but I think that we just need to leave our generation here, and then, deal with this generation today.
Mhm. And I understand, why you stayed with the one husband who was abusive, because you were protecting your children. But, if someone came to you and said, "Hey, I'm in this situation," what would you tell them? What would be your advice? How could you help them move to safety?
My advice is that I'm going to say this very consciously. Sometimes as women, we try to force people in to do things that they're not ready to do. I think that we first need to be a listening ear And whatever decision they make, we stick by that decision for them. And I'm not saying that they need to stay in an abusive relationship, but if they're not ready to leave, they're going to go back. If they're not ready to leave, there's no sense shaming, women that are in these situations, because we don't know all the details, of the situation. So my personal thing is that I would sit down and be their listening ear. If you have a way of escape, I would suggest, if you're not ready to leave, I'm here for you. But I would suggest you start getting like gift cards. When you go grocery shopping, start getting some Visa gift cards that you can set aside. Start taking pictures of documentations when he's not home. Get yourself prepared for that moment that you do want to leave. Because I just don't think we shame women that stay. And I don't think that we should be doing that, because we don't know the situation. People wanted me to leave immediately, but where was I going to go? First of all, I have, he has everything. I'm going to end up at a shelter. And then how long am I going to stay at that shelter? And then how long is somebody going to help me? Because as humans, we have a tendency to be in people's lives for 3 weeks. Like after a death, we're there helping them for 3 weeks, but then we move on with our lives. When a baby's born, 3 weeks, we're there, and then they're all on their own. Cook your own dinner. We're not cooking you dinners anymore or doing your laundry anymore. So I think that we need to be very careful and cautious on how we are their friends and how we represent them. And even if they stay, they're still brave, because they're making the decision based on the circumstances that are happening around them. I was still brave when I stayed, because I was protecting my children. I was protecting them because I didn't know what was going to happen when they were with him over the weekends. I had no idea. But if I was taking the assault and taking the badgering and taking the hitting, then he wasn't doing it to my children. So it may not be a popular it may not be a popular answer that you're looking for. But I just think that we need to walk women where they're at.
No, I love that perspective. And that's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Because you were very clear on why you stayed.
Yes. There was no, and, and I just had a conversation with my son. I have identical twin boys, and, and the relationships were always amazing when they were young. And then they went into the military at 17, and, and mom went through a shock. I went through, it was emotional to be now an empty nester, to not have my children, and especially my boys that I had dedicated so much, to them and protected them so much. So when they left, then a couple years later, my boys never came back home. They didn't go to college, and they didn't come back home for mommy to do their laundry. They didn't come home for me to make their favorite dinner. Mine went into the military, and then they ended up getting married young. So I never had the chance to coddle them, so to speak, in as older men. And so our relationships have, not rocky, but our relationships are different because they're both married now. And so I'm second into their life. So one of my sons and I, we've had some tough conversations, but this past 2 weeks ago, I went to his house and spent the night at his house because to see my grandchild and stuff like that. And we ended up sitting and talking for 7 hours until 4:00 in the morning. And it was, and moms that have adult sons will know what I'm talking about. There was something magical that happened, that I had the opportunity, and his wife never came outside. She didn't interrupt the conversation. She just let me spend that time with my son. And there was a burden that was lifted. There was some weight, that was lifted off of my shoulders, that my son still loved me. I didn't think he did, because he's moved on with his life and he doesn't call me all the time and he doesn't have a relationship with me all the time. And he still loves me. And I had to, have that faith in that. But one thing that he said, and listening to my story, and he said, Mom, I knew some of your story, but I guess I didn't realize how young you were. Like I had no idea that my mom was so young and all this stuff that happened to her. And he said, you know, you settled for all these crumbs in your life because you didn't believe in who you were. And I'm like, wow. And he was right. Because of all the trauma and the things that I had gone through, you know, having trauma at such a young age, that defines you. I don't know who I was supposed to be before that trauma, because trauma changes you and it makes you into somebody different. And you begin to tell stories in your own head because of the trauma that you have been through. So everything was always based on the hurt and the pain, because I thought, if you didn't call me, for instance, if you said, hey, Bambi, I'm going to call you in 5 minutes, and you decided not to call me in 5 minutes, my brain immediately went to this trauma, like, see, she really didn't like me. See, she went to call somebody else because she likes that person better and things like that. And when my son said that, he said, now I realize, I understand now, Mom, that, you know, all you had were the crumbs and you accepted the crumbs. And he said, but now you're a different woman now than you were, you know, then. And he was right. I did.
Beautiful. So let me ask you this. As a mom of military children in the military, I have I would call him a stepson. He's my ex's son. And he just went into the military recently. I mean, he just finished boot camp. He's on his way to get training and then to Germany. And of course, his mother, you know, she's crying. And how is it being a military mom, letting your child go? Just
It is one of the hardest things that I ever had to do. And ever since my children were like 5 years old, my boys were 2 years old when 9/11 happened. And they were sitting in high chairs eating Cheerios, you know, when 9/11 happened. And then all they ever wanted to do was be in the military. My sons went through at least 100 GI Joes. Like, they fought with these GI Joes, they bandaged them up, they duct taped them, they threw them, and then the next day they had a whole new scenario what was going to happen with this GI Joes. Our basement was a boot camp from all the neighborhood boys, in our neighborhood. There were times that I went down cellar in the basement, and my sons had all of these kids doing sit-ups and push-ups and going, telling them, you can't stop. We spent most of the time at military surplus stores, for them to have costumes. When they turned 12 and 13, we did all that airsoft. They had, oh my word, the games and the scenarios and the woods and the black marks on their faces, everything that we did. And tell you the truth, I was excited that my sons wanted to serve their country. I was excited. I was ecstatic that that's what they wanted to do. We went to the recruiters, all the time, because I homeschooled. So I had to, find out ways to make sure that I was giving them the education that they needed and stuff like that. They did really well on their ASVET. Then one of the recruiters said, hey, you can go in the military at 17. You can go into the Army at 17. Worst thing to tell my sons, like, they were convinced now that they were men and they could go into the military at 17 years old. And they hounded me. So I went back to the recruiters and they said that they could go in. And I said, okay, I will sign that contract if, and only if, my sons, after boot camp, they spend 1 year at the same duty station together, because they were identical twins. They'd never been apart. Mm-hmm. So they wrote that in their contract. And then I signed it at 17 years old. And my boys went into the military at 17. I didn't know. Wow, I don't want to cry. I didn't know that the day that they were going to be sworn in, that my life had just changed forever. Mm-hmm. It wasn't fun and games anymore. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't like, oh yeah, my sons are in the military. This is amazing. it was now a crushing mom that there is nobody left at home to take care of. There was no more activities. There was no more playing. There was no more practical jokes, people sitting around our table and making practical jokes. My life had changed. And I don't think, and then when they changed and they went to boot camp, they were identical twins. So the sergeants and the drill sergeants were pretty mean to my boys because they were identical twins. And I had my friends, I had my sons received a letter or a box every single day that they were in boot camp. I had it all organized. And so the sergeants got tired of looking at their names and just said, okay, we don't know who's doing it. So they made them do double of everything that they did. So if they had to do 50 sit-ups, then they had to do 100 because they had this, had this mail. So the day that they were ready to go, they were looking at their contracts and they were separating my twins. They were sending them to 2 different places. My sons contacted me and said, hey, Mom, they're sending us in 2 different places. I said, oh, no, absolutely not. Because I thought that was my safety, that at least they're together. So that was my safety. And they're like, no, they're going to separate. I said, absolutely not. Give me 10 minutes. And I called a friend that her husband worked at the Pentagon. So she called him and he actually contacted where my sons were and read their contract. So my sons called me and I'm like, what did you do, Mom?
Oh,
I said, I called somebody from the Pentagon. Like, Mom, what did you do? You can't do that. And they were like so mad at me. And here I am trying to think that it's a good thing, but they're really mad. Like, Mom, nobody calls the Pentagon. Like, but they separated. They were going to separate them. And then finally the boy said, Mom, it doesn't matter. We'll be separated. I said, it matters to me because they're reneging the contract. Mm-hmm. Mom, it doesn't matter. So they went to 2 different places. Now they wish to a point that they would have listened to me. Mm-hmm. But when they go, you have to realize they're beating down your children to nothing to be able to rebuild them up to become men. So I didn't have 17-year-old boys anymore. I had 17, 18-year-old men that they looked at me so differently than they did before they left. And that is heart-wrenching. And even now they're married. I don't have the opportunity to know everything that's going on in their lives. Their wife does. Then as a mother, you think if anything happens to your children, now the wife gets the flag. I don't. Our heads go like stupid because those are our children. Those are our sons that I let go too fast. I let go too early in their lives. And now I suffer. I suffer.
Yeah. So through all this, you've been an empty nester. You're an author. Who is Bambi now?
Oh, wow. Well, I am it used to be, you're a mommy, you're a wife, you're a cab driver and things like that. Now I am an overcomer. I am an author. I am a traveler. I am enthusiastic about life. I live by the 5-second rule. I am a really good friend and a really great person that has empathy, for people, because my job takes me into people's homes all day long. And I get to sit, I'm not a podcaster, but I might as well be, that every day I'm in a home that I get to be part of their lives and hear their stories. Stories transform you. Stories create another version of you, because the more you hear other people's stories, the more you become transformed. So, I'm that person. I am becoming, and I love that word because it takes women, we have like 3 different jobs in our lifetime, and so I've accomplished the mommy, job. Now I'm the mom of adult children. But now I'm becoming who I'm supposed to be. I'm going on my first cruise, this year. And I'm going to be a senior citizen on the first month of January. Like, how does that happen? Like 40 never bothered me. 50 never bothered me. But for some reason, saying I'm 55 and I can get McDonald's coffee for a discount, like that bothers me. I'm writing again. I do a blog, so I'm writing each week, and I'm writing my third book, which is amazing to be able to do that. My goal for like the next 10 years is that I would love to be doing my own podcast, but I also would love to be a public speaker, going out. Years ago, I had a dream that I was going on stage on a podium, and I looked out to the audience, and everybody in the audience were like, they looked homeless, they were dirty, and they had words on their chest that were that shameful, dirty, unloved. But I began to talk and began to give my testimony and began to, tell what God had done in my life. And I saw them changing before me. I saw their clothing change. They looked kept, and then they had other words, forgiven, courageous, brave. That is I know that that's my next journey, is to be able to go and present that, and to do that, and to be used to transform, other people's lives as my life has been transformed.
Beautiful. So how can people connect with you and also get your books?
Oh, well, I have a podcast. I don't have a podcast. No. I have a website that's called healingthroughstories.com. It's all one word, healingthroughstories.com, that I do a blog once, I do a blog every Friday. And I also have other women that if they wanted to write their story or a testimony and things like that, I have them also write, on my blog. My books, you can purchase my books, The Journey of Josephine, which looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I did win an award. I won 2 awards. I won gold on my cover, and I won gold on my website, and then I won silver on my writing. So this is my first book, and I won something. So this one, and then I wrote The Treasures of My Heart, which is also on my website. But you can also get them from Amazon, because I know that people, get points and things like that to order them from Amazon. And you can also order them in any bookstore all across the country. And you can also go and ask your library, to order them. But I use, like most authors that have websites, would love for people to go on our websites to purchase our books, because then Amazon doesn't get the huge cut in it. But yeah, so my website is called healingthroughstories.com.
Beautiful. Thank you. So now a personal question, although a lot of mine today for you were personal. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
I love the giggles of my grandchildren. There's a difference between laughter and giggles. Mm-hmm. I have, my one son has 4 sons, and I go into their house and they say, "Oh, Nana, you're so beautiful. Nana, you're so beautiful. Nana, we just love you. We just love you. And can we have some gum? Do you have some gum?" Like, so that's all that they want from me. I have another grandson that tells people that he goes on adventures with his Nana, so that when Nana goes someplace, he gets to go because he's my traveling partner. Mm-hmm. So to see life through the eyes of them. I have another grandson, that a couple of years ago, I had bought him some muffins, and for some reason it said stud on it or something. And so I continue to call him Stud Muffin Henry, "Oh, you're my stud muffin." And then he'll go, "No, you're my strawberry muffin," and we'll go back and forth, back and forth. So grandchildren, are like my greatest joy. Also writing, there's something about being able to write and to tell a story. I'm a pretty good storyteller. So to be able to tell stories and to be able to relate to people is pretty amazing. And since I'm a transplant from Buffalo to here, I am building my tribe, in Brunswick. I didn't have any kind of relationships here because I traveled all the time until my company dissolved my position. So I was very alone. And I have been building a tribe. In fact, I just had a tea party to launch my second book. And I actually had 18 women that showed up to my tea party. That's pretty good for somebody that is a transplant and is just starting to build a tribe. So those are my passions, and just sharing, my story to know that you don't have to stay broken, that you can be transformed.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thanks for being on the podcast today and being very transparent.
Well, thanks. How else are you supposed to be? It's just, I want people to see the real me. This is me. This is the real me. And if we allow ourselves to be real, then other people will be real in front of us because they don't think that they have to be something different.
Exactly. So here's the last question before we complete. What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
I would say that my best advice is to every morning go to your mirror and look at yourself and know that you have made it. Look at yourself and know that you are the person that loves you the most. And when you look in the mirror, know that you are your greatest hero, that you have survived until this day and you're going to continue to survive. And for women, fix our crowns because we are royalty.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bambi.
You're so welcome.
We'll talk to you again soon.